Lori, thanks very much. Missouri Republican Congressman Roy Blunt joins me now from Capitol Hill to talk about this. Congressman, thank you for the time. You've had problems with the AIG bailout from the very start, the government's bailout. I imagine this story has only added to those concerns.
Well, it really has, and you're right, Peter. I've had problems with this from the very start. Not only was the Congress not involved in the decision by the Fed and Treasury to give money to AIG, as it turned out after the troubled assets relief program went into place, the Fed paid themselves back without telling anybody in the Congress while this debate was going on that was one of the places that they'd use this money for. Now, how that $80 billion helped restore credit to the country, I don't know at all. And then today, we're dealing with the revelations from yesterday on these emails that Timothy Geithner, then the head of the New York Fed, now the Secretary of the Treasury, was telling AIG not to make information available to the public. And in this case, I think the public also included the Congress of the United States. This is a discussion that we should have had at the time. Lots of people have gotten in lots of trouble for not providing information to the public that the public deserved to know on investments and how money was being spent. And it could be that Secretary Geithner's in that same kind of trouble, Peter.
Well, Congressman, let me ask you about that, because obviously the New York Fed has responded to this, and so has the Treasury, first of all saying that the Secretary recused himself after he was nominated for his position, didn't deal with AIG directly at the time of these emails in question. So is it fair to go after Secretary Geithner when he had recused himself from this? The New York Fed says this was essentially correspondence between lawyers and AIG, and ultimately this was AIG's decision on disclosure, not the New York Fed.
Well, the New York Fed is certainly the Federal Reserve was part of that decision. I've talked to Chairman Bernanke about this weeks ago when I found out that they'd used the TARP money to pay themselves back. I'm concerned about what the Fed did at all levels, including the New York Fed. And I'd be very concerned about what Secretary Geithner did in this regard before he recused himself, before he was nominated to be the Secretary of the Treasury. And we're going to make these same mistakes again if we don't know what happened and why it happened, and if we've learned from the errors of the past on things like simple public disclosure of events, of activities the public had the right to know once the public made this huge investment in that company that supposedly was too big to fail.
Let me note also the Treasury Department has pointed out that the Secretary's name is not on any of these emails specifically. But let me ask you what you want to see right now happen next. I know that other Republicans are calling for hearings. Are you of the expectation that hearings will indeed take place and they will involve the Treasury Secretary?
You know, I'm not of the expectation that they will. Spencer Baucus, the ranking Republican on the Financial Services Committee, and I wrote Chairman Franks a letter weeks ago saying we thought hearings needed to be held, that Secretary Geithner needed to participate in those hearings. No response. I wrote Secretary Geithner a letter asking some specific questions weeks and weeks ago. No response. I think clearly the administration's hoping they can stonewall their way through this whole discussion of what happened, why it happened, and how the current Secretary of the Treasury or institutions he was responsible for was involved in what happened at the time.
Really quickly, Congressman, just a couple seconds left. Are you calling for the Treasury Secretary to step down because of this?
I'm calling for this Treasury Secretary to answer questions. He has a chance to do that. He should do that. I hope he does that.
Congressman Roy Blunt of Missouri, Republican, thank you very much for the time. Appreciate you joining us during this recess. We'll continue to follow the story. Lori, we'll send it back to you in New York.
Peter, thanks. We're going to lighten things up here next. We're going to head live to the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas.